Okay, welcome to the PJS Book Review Rating System. This is my office. It's a mess, I know. I'm going to try my best to get through this as fast as possible. I don't want to make a really long video, and if I'm talking really fast, you have the advanced control of being able to rewind and watch it again. There's two categories of ratings that I'm going to be using in my PJS book review videos. One category is about the book itself. Is it practical or is it more theological? The second rating system is going to be about who the book is for. Is it for the church member, pastor, or the scholar? So let's go through the rating system. I'm going to show you examples and explain in a concise, very fast way on how the ratings work. Who is the book written for? Number one, the church member. If I recommend the book being for the church member, it has to do a little bit more with the nature of the topic, but how easy is it to read? That means the book is not going to get into dense type of content that maybe only a seminary student or a grad level student with a master's degree would understand. So the book is easy to read, the content is easy to follow, and you don't need to know Greek and Hebrew to understand the content. Here are some examples. This is a book written by John MacArthur, Why Believe the Bible. Topic is easy to understand, but the way it's written, the way he explains the content is also easy to follow. He doesn't get into Greek and Hebrew in here. He doesn't get into advanced theological discussions that the average church member might not be able to follow. Another example, classic book, a book that every Christian should read, Knowing God by J.I. Packer. The nature of the content is about God. Yes, it's about the theology of God, but this book is great because, again, the way it's written, the content is easy to follow. J.I. Packer explains the nature of God, who God is, in ways that anyone can understand. A person doesn't need a master's degree in theology to understand this book. If I recommend a book to be for the pastor, it doesn't mean a church member can't read it or should not read it, or a church member can't understand it. I want to make that very clear. It doesn't mean that a pastor is more intelligent than the church member, nor does it mean the church member is not intelligent enough or doesn't study enough to understand or be able to read books that I recommend for a pastor. When I say it's recommended for the pastor, all that means is that the nature of the topic might be a little bit more pastoral. It might be a little bit more geared for the pastor because it's getting into a little bit more of theology. It's getting a little bit more into meaning and the why. But a book recommended for the pastor might get into some content that church members doesn't understand. It might get a little bit into Greek and Hebrew. It might get into some advanced theological discussions that most church members might get kind of lost. And most importantly, I feel like most church members aren't really that interested in deep theological discussions talking about different perspectives of theology. That's just my opinion. Again, some of you out there like that stuff, and that's okay, and that's good. Here are some examples. Apostolic Preaching of the Cross by Leon Morris. Some church members like reading this book. I recommend this to be for the pastor because it's pretty dense. It gets into meaning, not a lot of practical stuff in here, really digs deep into this topic. Here's another example, The Erosion of Inerrancy in Evangelicalism. The nature of the topic, a little bit more pastoral. However, the content, the way this book is written is pretty dense. It's pretty deep. Pastoral books start getting into a little bit more of the academic side, academic style of writing. Again, not a lot of practical stuff in here. It deals a lot with the meaning of inerrancy, answering the why question. Here's an example of where the nature of the topic I feel like is very pastoral. This book is about how to set up and how to train elders in your church. This book is about what is an elder. Most church members, I feel like, might not be that interested in this topic, and I feel like most church members aren't really that interested on how to set up an elder board in your church. The third rating in this category is the book written for the scholar. Now here's an example where the book, the nature of the topic, and the content is very dense, very deep, and this is the type of book where if you don't have graduate studies, if you didn't go to seminary, if you're not really into higher end scholarly written work, you're gonna get pretty lost. This is an example where I feel like most church members are gonna be very lost. And the reason for that is because the content of the book gets into very, very advanced academics and topics, and the style of content is not really written for the average church member. An example is Ephesians commentary by Harold Hoehner. Now, in my opinion, most commentaries would be rated for the pastor. It doesn't mean church members can't can't read it, but a lot of commentaries get into Greek and Hebrew and all this stuff that most church members don't really know or understand. This is another beast. In this commentary, it's not just written for the pastor, but this is an example where it's actually written for the scholar. Harold Hoehner gets so deep into this commentary that it's detailed, very deep into the Greek. He gets so minute in his research that it's very scholarly. A pastor could read this, but this is the type of book that you also could be reading if you're writing like a dissertation on Ephesians or maybe a topic in Ephesians. Here's another example, Commentary of the New Testament Use of the Old Testament. Now, when I read that title, right away you should be thinking the topic alone is kind of very deep and minute and scholarly. This is an example of a book where it's going to do a lot of research, going to do a lot of comparison between Old Testament and New Testament. I don't think a lot of church members would be interested in that. Pastors are probably interested in this, but it doesn't mean that the pastors can't read it. Again, it's the style of the content. This content is super dense, super deep, very detailed, and that's why I rate it for the scholar. Again, I want to remind everyone that no matter what I recommend, whether I recommend for the church member, the pastor, or the scholar, it doesn't mean that certain books that I rated it for can't be read by other people in these three groups. Now for the other rating system, I'm going to rate the book as practical or as theological. The difference between both these ratings is one is practical, which means that the book is going to get a lot of application. If you want to read books that answers the how question, how do I do this? How do I do that? What do I even do? These are practical books. I feel like a lot of church members are very interested in practical application. They want to know, how do I defeat this sin? How do I worship God? What does it mean to evangelize and how do I do it? These are what practical books are. The way I like to define theological books is this. These are the type of books that answer the question of meaning. They're answering the why question. They're going to be very focused on what does something mean or why do we do something. They're not going to be filled with a lot of practical application. Practical application might be implied, but that's not necessarily the purpose of their book. They're very theological, just trying to explain meaning, focus on doctrine. So let's go through some examples. Crazy Busy, written by Kevin DeYoung. Very practical book. This entire book, every single chapter is going to be about practical application. It's about how to conquer busyness. It does talk a little bit about what does busyness mean, and you might be thinking, well, shouldn't that be theological? But again, the purpose of this book is not theological. Every single chapter is going to give you practical points on how to make sure your life is not too busy. Classic book, Spiritual Leadership by J. Oswald Sanders. Another very practical book. Every single chapter here is going to be talking about how to be a leader. What should you actually be doing? Practical points in leadership. Now, this might give a little bit of theology. He does include Bible verses in here. He does talk about what does leadership mean, but main purpose here, very practical. Another classic book, Disciplines of a Godly Man by Kent Hughes. Very practical book. Every single chapter explaining how to practice a specific discipline if you are a godly man or you're a man that desires more godliness in life. Now, this is actually an example that flutters between theology and practical. It does a little bit of both, but I believe that the nature of this book is written more for practical application. So these are for the people who like reading about the what and the why questions and getting those answers, but it also gives you a good amount of practical application. Now, some examples of theology. Now, when I say theology, many of you might think a book like this, Systematic Theology by Wayne Grudem. I only bring this up because this is the way you should be thinking about what a theological book is. A book like this is very systematized, categorized, but very focused on meaning, why we believe something, why is something true. There's not a lot of practical application in here. It might be implied, but that's not the main purpose of this book. Another great example is Salvation to the Ends of the Earth, written by Andreas Kirstenberger and P.T. O'Brien, or Peter O'Brien, right? This book here is strictly focused on Old Testament all the way to New Testament and really covering what does missions mean. It's giving you an overview of the Bible on explaining the theology of missions. This is not a book for you to read to try to figure out how to set up your missions program and how to train your church members to do missions work in another country or here in the States. Whole book is really answering the why question and what does missions mean in the Bible. I mean, just by reading the title alone, this should be clear. A theology on the book of Luke and Acts. Darrell Bach is going to talk about the Gospel of Luke and Acts and just talking about the major theological themes in both those books. What were those themes? What were those theological main points that Luke likes to carry in both those books? Or What are those theological main points that really lead the purpose of these books? Not a lot of application here, just theology. So I try to go as fast as possible. Those are examples. Watch this video again if you forget about how I'm rating these books. And no matter what I rate the book for, that is just a rating system. In no way do I mean that if it's outside of the rating system that you cannot read that book. Don't think that. I'm just giving you a heads up of what you should expect if you do read that book. Thanks for watching this video, you guys. Go ahead and watch my book review videos. I'm trying to pump them out about once a month, and tell me what type of books you want me to read and review. I'm trying to read a lot of books on leadership. I'll read anything about the church, but make your suggestions and I'll try to get them in. And remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so you know when my next book review video comes out. See you then.